June 17, 1930, Washington, D.C., President Herbert Hoover signs the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act into law. His hand shakes slightly as he puts pen to paper. Over 1,000 economists have begged him not to sign. They wrote a petition, they warned of disaster. Hoover ignored them all. The bill raises tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. The average tariff jumps from 40% to 60% on dutiable items. This is the highest tariff rate in American history. Within weeks, Canada retaliates, then France, then Britain, Italy, Spain, Mexico, Cuba, Switzerland. 24 countries impose their own tariffs. Global trade collapses. U.S. imports fall from $4.4 billion in 1929 to $1.5 billion in 1933. That is a 66% decline. US exports fall from $5.4 billion to $2.1 billion. Another 61% drop. World trade shrinks by 66% between 1929 and 1934. But here is what makes this different. The tariff was supposed to protect American jobs. It destroyed them instead. Unemployment was 8% when Hoover signed the bill. It jumped to 16% in 1931, then 25% by 1933. 1 in 4 Americans could not find work. The tariff did not prevent the Great Depression, but it made it worse. Much worse and longer. How did a bill meant to save American farmers and workers end up destroying them? And why are we watching the exact same pattern unfold right now with Trump's 2025 tariff wars? This is the story of Smoot-Hawley. By the end, you will understand the 7 steps that turn protection into destruction. See how tariffs trigger retaliation spirals, and recognize the warning signs flashing in today's trade wars. This is not just history, this is a warning. It is 1928 America. The economy is booming, the roaring 20s, stock market hitting new highs, cities growing, factories humming. Everyone thinks prosperity will last forever, but underneath the surface, farmers are suffering. They have been suffering since 1920. Walk through the Midwest and you see the contrast. In Chicago, skyscrapers rise, jazz clubs overflow, money flows. Drive 100 miles west into Iowa farmland and you see abandoned barns, foreclosure notices, desperate families. Crop prices have been falling for 8 years. Wheat that sold for $2.19 per bushel in 1919 now sells for $1.05. Corn dropped from 1.51 to 81 cents. Cotton from 36 cents per pound to 18 cents. In this world, farmers need help. They produce too much. Europe recovered from World War I. European farmers are growing again. American farmers face competition. Prices fall. Debt rises. Banks foreclose. 1/3 of American farmers lose their land in the 1920s. This is a quiet depression in the countryside while cities party. To most farmers, the solution is obvious: tariffs. If the government raises tariffs on imported agricultural products, foreign food becomes expensive. Americans will buy domestic. Demand for American crops rises. Prices recover. Farmers are saved. This logic seems bulletproof, and it is exactly wrong. Meet Senator Reed Smoot of Utah. He chairs the Senate Finance Committee. He is a Republican. Smoot believes in high tariffs. Has his whole career. In 1928, presidential candidate Herbert Hoover promises farmers he will raise agricultural tariffs if elected. Hoover wins. He calls a special session of Congress in 1929 to fulfill that promise. Then there is Representative Willis Hawley of Oregon. He chairs the House Ways and Means Committee. Another Republican, another protectionist. In January 1929, his committee begins hearings on a new tariff bill. The goal is simple: raise agricultural tariffs, help farmers, keep the promise. But economist Paul Douglas sees the danger. He understands that tariffs do not just raise prices, they trigger retaliation. If America blocks imports, other countries will block American exports. The result is less trade everywhere. He circulates a petition among economists. More than 1,000 sign. They urge Hoover to veto any tariff bill. Douglas says tariffs will make the depression worse. Nobody listens. Politicians do not care what economists think. They care about votes. And farmers vote. By May 1929, the House passes the tariff bill. But it is no longer just agricultural. Industrial interests flooded the committee with demands. Protect steel, protect textiles, protect chemicals, protect glass, protect everything. The bill raises tariffs on industrial goods more than agricultural goods. What none of them know yet is that they are about to trigger the greatest collapse in global trade in modern history. September 1929. The Senate takes up the tariff bill, chaired by Reed Smoot. The Senate Finance Committee raises some tariffs higher, lowers others, shifts the bill slightly more toward agriculture, but the scope remains massive. Over 20,000 tariff increases on products from wool to cement to copper to sugar. Then October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, the stock market crashes. The economy starts to contract. This should kill the tariff bill. Economic crisis means you need trade, not barriers. But the opposite happens. The crash strengthens support for tariffs. Politicians panic. They want to protect American jobs, block foreign competition, save the economy through isolation. Foreign countries start protesting. By September 1929, before the bill even passes, Hoover's administration receives protest notes from 23 trading partners. These are not idle threats, these are formal diplomatic warnings. If you raise tariffs, we will retaliate. Canada is blunt, France is clear, Britain is explicit, Germany warns, Italy protests, Switzerland objects, Mexico threatens. Hoover and Congress ignore them all. They think the warnings are bluffs. Or they do not care. America is the largest economy in the world, the biggest market. Other countries need America more than America needs them. They will not really retaliate. They cannot afford to. This assumption is catastrophically wrong. In May 1930, the Senate passes the bill. The vote is 44 to 42. Narrow, very narrow. But it passes. Now it goes to Hoover. Over 1,000 economists send the petition. It explains clearly why tariffs will fail. High tariffs do not protect domestic industries. They make everything more expensive. They reduce purchasing power. They invite retaliation. They shrink trade. They destroy jobs and export industries. Hoover reads the petition. Privately, he agrees with much of it. He knows the economists are probably right, but he cannot veto the bill. He ran on raising tariffs. His party leadership supports it. Republicans control Congress. If he vetoes, he breaks with his own party, splits the Republicans, looks weak, betrays farmers who voted for him. On June 17, 1930, Hoover signs the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It becomes law the next day. The stock market reacts immediately, falls sharply. Investors understand what this means. Trade war, less commerce, economic pain. The Dow Jones has already fallen 40% since the October 1929 crash. It will fall another 40% over the next 2 years. The retaliation begins instantly. Canada acts first. They are America's most loyal trading partner, largest customer for US exports. In May 1930, before Hoover even signs the bill, Canada imposes new tariffs on 16 products. These products account for 30% of US exports to Canada. 1 month 30% of trade blocked. Other countries follow. Cuba raises tariffs on American goods. Mexico, France, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina within 2 years. 24 countries enact retaliatory tariffs specifically targeting American exports. This is not random protectionism. This is deliberate retaliation. They are punishing America. The numbers tell the story. In 1929, U.S. exports to Europe totaled $2.3 billion. By 1932, only $784 million, a 66% collapse. U.S. imports from Europe fall from $1.3 billion to $390 million, a 70% decline. Farm exports, which the tariff was supposed to protect, fall by 1/3. Farmers are worse off than before. Global trade enters a death spiral. When America raises tariffs, other countries cannot sell to America. They earn fewer dollars. With fewer dollars, they cannot buy American goods. So American exports fall. American companies lay off workers. Those workers buy less. Demand falls. Companies produce less. More layoffs. The cycle accelerates downward. But the mechanism is worse than simple trade reduction. The tariffs destroy credit relationships. In the 1920s, American banks lent money to European companies. Those companies bought American goods with borrowed dollars, then paid back the loans with export earnings. The tariff breaks this cycle. Europeans cannot export to America. They cannot earn dollars. They cannot repay loans. American banks lose money. Banks fail. This feedback loop devastates the banking system. Between 1929 and 1933, 9,000 American banks failed. That is 40% of all banks. When banks fail, they take deposits with them. People lose savings. They stop spending. Demand collapses. The Depression deepens. May 1930. Canada is furious. They responded with tariffs in May, but that is not enough. In 1932, Canada attends the British Empire Economic Conference. They forge closer economic links with Britain, sign preferential trade agreements. Reduce dependence on America. The special trade relationship between America and Canada, built over decades, is damaged for a generation. France and Britain develop new trading partners. They turn to their colonies, create imperial preference systems, trade within their empires, exclude American goods. Germany develops a system of trade via clearing agreements, bilateral deals that bypass normal commerce. The global trading system fragments. Multilateral trade dies. Economic nationalism rises. The trigger for farmers is devastating. Smoot and Hawley promised tariffs would raise crop prices, help farmers. The opposite happens. Foreign countries cannot sell goods to America. They need revenue. How do they get it? By raising tariffs on American farm products. Wheat, corn, cotton, tobacco, all blocked by foreign tariffs. American farmers cannot export. Prices fall even further. By 1933, wheat sells for 38 cents per bushel, down from 1.05 when Smoot-Hawley passed. Cotton drops to 6 cents per pound, down from 18 cents. Farmers earn less than it costs to produce. Thousands more lose their farms. The policy designed to save them destroys them. Meet John Mayer. He farms in Iowa, corn and hogs. In 1929, he earned enough to support his family and pay the mortgage. Not rich, comfortable. When Smoot-Hawley passes, he supports it, thinks it will help. By 1932, his corn sells for so little he cannot pay his costs. He owes money to the bank. The bank forecloses. He loses the farm his grandfather bought in 1870. His family moves to a city, no jobs there either. Meet Sarah and Tom Harrison. They own a textile mill in North Carolina. Small operation, 50 employees. They supported tariffs on textiles, thought it would block foreign competition, let them raise prices. It did block imports, but it also blocked exports. Europe retaliates with tariffs on American textiles. The Harrisons lose their export markets. Their foreign customers cannot afford American textiles anymore. Sales drop 40%. They lay off 30 workers. Then close entirely in 1932. 50 families lose their income. But some people escape damage. The lucky few who sold export businesses before retaliation hit. The investors who shorted the market. The economists who warned this would happen and positioned accordingly. Paul Douglas keeps his job teaching economics. He watches his predictions come true. It gives him no satisfaction. The suffering is too widespread. In 1932, voters delivered their verdict. Congressional elections, Democrats win large majorities in both House and Senate. Smoot and Hawley both lose their seats. Voters are not confused about cause and effect. The tariff failed. The men who wrote it are fired. Hoover loses the presidency to Franklin Roosevelt in a landslide. Roosevelt campaigns on reducing tariffs, promoting trade, undoing. The courts flood with bankruptcy filings, not lawsuits, companies just failing. Workers cannot pay debts, businesses cannot pay suppliers, banks cannot pay depositors. The cascading defaults destroy economic relationships built over decades. Trust evaporates. Nobody extends credit anymore. Everyone demands cash. But nobody has cash. Commerce freezes. By 1933, unemployment hits 25%. 13 million Americans cannot find work. Industrial production falls 46% from the 1929 peak. National income drops from $88 billion to $40 billion. This is economic collapse, not recession. Depression, and Smoot-Hawley made it worse. So what really happened? History books say Smoot-Hawley was a well-intentioned mistake. Politicians tried to help farmers, did not foresee retaliation, made an error. But that is not just wrong. It is dangerously wrong. Here is what actually happened. Smoot-Hawley was not an accident. It was the predictable result of putting sectoral interests ahead of systemic stability. Every economist knew tariffs would fail. Every foreign country warned they would retaliate. The disaster was foretold. Politicians chose to ignore the warnings because protecting farmers and manufacturers today mattered more than avoiding depression tomorrow. Let me break this down. The Smoot-Hawley disaster followed 7 steps. First, economic pain in one sector, farmers suffering while the rest of the economy booms. Second, political pressure from that sector, farmers demand protection, vote for politicians who promise tariffs. Third, politicians respond with protection, cannot resist organized pressure from suffering constituents. Fourth, protection expands beyond the original sector. Once you start raising tariffs, every industry wants them. Steel, textiles, chemicals, glass, all demand protection. Fifth, trading partners retaliate. They warned they would. Nobody believed them, they did it anyway. Sixth, retaliation triggers a trade war spiral. America raises tariffs. Others retaliate. America raises tariffs again. The cycle feeds itself. 7th, trade collapses. Both sides lose. The economy shrinks. Everyone is worse off than before. Think of it like this. Imagine you own a bakery. Your competitor across town is selling bread cheaper than you. You ask the city to ban your competitor's bread. The city agrees. Now you can charge higher prices. You make more money. For a while. But your competitor also sells in the next town over. That town retaliates by banning your bread from their market. You lose those sales. Your competitor loses sales in your town. Both bakeries earn less. Both towns have less bread, higher prices. Everyone loses. But here is what nobody talks about. The real profiteers were not the protected industries. They failed to. The real winners were the people who shorted the market, who bet on economic collapse, who understood retaliation was inevitable and positioned accordingly. George Soros was not alive yet, but his future strategy of betting against government stupidity had its blueprint in 1930. The system was designed to transfer political benefits to vocal constituencies while spreading economic costs across everyone. Farmers and manufacturers got temporary relief. Everyone else paid higher prices, lost jobs, suffered depression. This was not accident. This was how protection always works. Concentrated benefits, diffused costs. Now let me show you the pattern. This is the trade war formula. It happens every time. First, economic sector in distress. One part of the economy suffers while others thrive. Creates political pressure. Politicians must respond. Second, promise of protection. Politicians pledge to raise trade barriers, block imports, save jobs. Sounds good, wins votes. Third, protection expands. Once you start, every sector demands barriers. The bill grows, becomes comprehensive, protects everything. Fourth, retaliation, warnings ignored. Trading partners threaten to retaliate. Politicians dismiss the warnings, assume bluff, or do not care. Fifth, immediate retaliation. Foreign countries impose their own tariffs, target politically sensitive exports, maximize pain. Sixth, trade war spiral. Each side raises tariffs again, trying to pressure the other two back down. Both lose, neither backs down. Seventh, economic collapse. Trade shrinks, jobs disappear, both sides are worse off. But politicians cannot admit mistake. Double down instead. This pattern repeated in 1930. It repeated in the 1970s with Nixon's import surcharge. It is repeating right now in 2025. Now let us talk about 2025. Right now, President Trump has launched the largest global tariff war since Smoot-Hawley. In February 2025, he imposed 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, except for Canadian oil and energy, which got 10%, and 10% on China. Then in April 2025, he imposed reciprocal tariffs on almost all countries. Rates from 15% to 50% depending on the country. The numbers are staggering. Tariffs average 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico, and 20% on China as of late 2025. Brazil faces 40%. India faces 25% tariffs. The European Union negotiated down to 15%. Japan got 15%. But dozens of countries still face 20 to 50% tariffs. Sound familiar? Let us run through the checklist. Economic sector in distress. Check. Trump campaigned on helping manufacturing workers, bringing back factory jobs, punishing China for trade imbalances. The Rust Belt voted for protection. Promise of protection. Check. Trump promised massive tariffs, 60% on China, 20% on everyone else. Use tariffs to fund tax cuts. Replace income taxes with tariff revenue. Bring back American manufacturing. Protection expands. Check. Started with China, then added Canada and Mexico, then all countries, then sector-specific tariffs. Steel and aluminum at 50%, autos at 25%, lumber at 10%, kitchen cabinets and furniture at 25%, pharmaceuticals at 100% unless made in America. The list keeps growing. Retaliation warnings ignored. Check. Canada announced retaliation immediately. Mexico warned. China protested. The EU threatened 25% counter tariffs. India said it would respond. Trump dismissed them all. Called tariffs beautiful. Said trade wars are easy to win. Immediate retaliation. Check. Canada imposed 25% tariffs on American vehicles not compliant with USMCA. China imposed 15% tariffs on coal and LNG in February, then 10 to 15% on agricultural products in March. The EU imposed 25% tariffs on US goods in waves starting April 15. Mexico retaliated. The tariff war spread globally. Trade war spiral. Check. Trump raised China tariffs to 125% in April. China responded with 84% counter-tariff. After months of escalation, both sides agreed to temporary truces, reducing to 10% in May, extended through November 2026. But the threat remains. One misstep restarts the spiral. Economic collapse. Partial check. The S&P 500 fell 10% in 2 days after the April tariffs entering correction territory. Markets lost over $4 trillion in value in March. But unlike 1930, the economy has not collapsed. Not yet. The question is whether we are in the early stages or can avoid the full disaster. Now, is this exactly like Smoot-Hawley? No, we have differences. Nearly 46% of U.S. imports are exempt from Trump tariffs through trade agreements and specific exemptions. USMCA-compliant goods from Canada and Mexico avoid tariffs. The Trump administration negotiated framework agreements with dozens of countries, lowering rates in exchange for concessions. The legal challenges also distinguished 2025. In May 2025, the Court of International Trade ruled Trump's IEEPA tariffs invalid as contrary to law. The court permanently enjoined the executive orders, though the decision was appealed, and the Supreme Court is currently hearing the case. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, the trade war might end. Unlike 1930, when courts had no role. But the fundamentals are identical. Protectionism to help one sector, retaliation from trading partners, escalating trade war, economic damage spreading. The pattern is the same, the scale is similar. Smoot-Hawley raised average tariffs from 40% to 60%. Trump's tariffs average around 47% on many dutiable imports, approaching Smoot-Hawley levels when exemptions are excluded. What is different? The speed. Smoot-Hawley took 18 months from first hearing to signing. Trump imposed tariffs in weeks. Retaliation happened in days. Modern communication accelerates everything. The spiral spins faster. The global scale. In 1930, trade was regional. Europe traded with Europe. Americas traded within Americas. Asia was isolated. Now trade is global. Supply chains span continents. Tariffs in one place disrupt production everywhere. The damage spreads instantly. What should you watch for? First, trade volumes. Smoot-Hawley caused world trade to decline 66% in 5 years. If global trade starts falling at 10, 20, 30% annually, the pattern is accelerating. Current data shows trade holding up because of exemptions and truces. If exemptions end, trade will collapse. Second, retaliation, escalation. In 1930, 24 countries retaliated within 2 years. In 2025, dozens of countries imposed counter-tariffs within months. If countries move from negotiation to allowed trade war, the spiral becomes unstoppable. Third, political backlash. Smoot and Hawley both lost their seats in 1932. Hoover lost the presidency. If Trump's tariffs devastate the economy, voters will punish Republicans in 2026 and 2028. The political cycle limits how long tariffs can remain. Fourth, Supreme Court decision. If the court rules Trump exceeded his authority, most tariffs disappear overnight. This could end the trade war before it reaches Smoot-Hawley depths. The legal challenge is the escape valve 1930 lacked. I am not predicting another Great Depression. I am not saying the economy will collapse. I am showing you the pattern, the exact pattern from 1930. Protection, retaliation, escalation, damage. Every step identical. The question is whether we stop before reaching the final stage. So why do we keep falling for this? Because protectionism is not an economic failure. It is a political success. We are wired to support protecting our own. American jobs matter more than abstract trade theory. When factories close, politicians must respond. Promising tariffs wins elections. Politicians are wired to deliver visible benefits to concentrated constituencies while hiding diffused costs across everyone. Tariffs help specific industries. Steel, aluminum, autos. Those workers vote. The costs spread across all consumers as higher prices. Consumers do not connect tariffs to prices. Perfect political strategy. Economists are wired to explain why protection fails. They wrote 1,000 economist petitions in 1930. They write similar warnings today. Politicians ignore them because economists do not vote in blocks, do not donate to campaigns, do not swing elections. Their warnings are dismissed. Trading partners are wired to retaliate. National pride demands it. If America blocks our exports, we must respond. Show strength. protect our own workers. Politicians in other countries face the same pressures as American politicians, must respond to suffering sectors. The spiral is inevitable once it starts. But here is what this story really teaches us. The disaster is not the tariff. The disaster is the political system that makes tariffs attractive. Democracies struggle with trade policy. Protectionism delivers concentrated benefits to vocal groups. Free trade delivers diffused benefits to everyone. Vocal groups win political battles. Everyone loses economically. Smoot-Hawley taught a generation that tariffs are dangerous. From 1934 to 2016, American presidents of both parties reduced tariffs, negotiated trade agreements, opened markets, starting with Roosevelt's Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934, continuing through GATT, NAFTA, and WTO. This consensus lasted 80 years, but that generation died. The new generation does not remember Smoot-Hawley, does not understand how tariffs triggered depression. Douglas Irwin notes that a whole generation of Republicans and Democrats after World War II was conditioned against tariff hikes because of the 1930s experience. Now we have a new generation of leaders willing to pull the trigger on higher tariffs. The question is whether we learn the lesson again without experiencing the full catastrophe, or whether we need another Great Depression to remember why protectionism fails. Understanding this does not give you a crystal ball. The 1930 tariff passed in June. The worst economic damage came in 1931, 1933. 3 years later, the lag between policy and pain creates political space. Politicians can claim tariffs are working, point to temporary benefits, ignore building damage, but pattern recognition is priceless. When you see tariffs triggering retaliation, you are seeing 1930. When you see trade war spirals, you are seeing. When you see politicians ignoring economists, you are seeing Hoover. The outcome is predictable. The question is whether we have time to change course. You cannot control presidential tariff policy. You cannot stop retaliation. You cannot prevent trade wars, but you can protect your own economic position. Diversify investments. Avoid companies dependent on exports. Hedge against inflation. Recognize the pattern before the collapse. The Americans who survived the Great Depression best were not the ones who believed politicians promising protection. They were the ones who understood economic reality, who saved in gold when currency lost value, who diversified when concentration was dangerous, who recognized the pattern early. That lesson is 95 years old. It is timeless. Now I want to hear from you. Do you see the Smoot-Hawley pattern in Trump's 2025 tariffs? Will the Supreme Court stop the trade war? Or are we headed for another depression? What am I missing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The best analysis often comes from you, not me. If this changed how you see tariffs and trade wars, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more economic history that actually matters. Next time, we are diving into the Corn Laws. When 19th century Britain chose protectionism over free trade, starved Ireland, and nearly triggered revolution before finally repealing the tariffs. Another pattern hiding in plain sight. Another lesson they do not teach in school. Remember, history does not repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, 2025 is rhyming with 1930. See you in the next one.